Welcome to Making the Cut podcast with Chris Hill and Sean Winter, where we help you succeed in life and business by sharing principles and strategies that guide some of the most successful people in the world.
Welcome to episode 21 of the Making the Cut podcast. Today we have Bjork Ostrom of Pinch of Yum and Food Blogger Pro. I'm with my co-host, Sean Winter. What's going on, buddy?
Everything is great, but I will say, I think Bjork is going to take the crown with the coolest name on the podcast. I don't know. What do you think?
You took the words right out of my mouth, man. Bjork's definitely a lot cooler than Chris or Sean.
For sure. Things are going good. Just wrapping up the October issue of Entrepreneurial Chef. Danielle Ballou is actually our cover story, which super excited. We even have Gavin Kaysen in there, Alice Hart, and Lee Schrager as well. So got some really cool success stories. So what about you? You wrapping up Crush Your Career, the new book?
I am. It's been a little bit back and forth trying to make sure that all the right pieces, all the right stories are there. And I'm grateful for you to write the foreword for it. It'll be out there shortly. And I believe we're going to have a little excerpt in the October issue of Entrepreneurial Chef. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. We'll do a little, what are we doing? The comfort zone. How to get out of your comfort zone.
That's right. And hopefully there'll be a lot of practical information for folks out there. You can find it on Amazon. Just type in Chris Hill, Crush Your Career, and you can find it there. And speaking of crushing your career, our guest today, Bjork, he and his wife have done some pretty awesome things with their company, Pinch of Yum and Food Blogger Pro.
Yeah, I connected with Bjork. Actually, I came across them almost a year and a half ago when I was doing research for Entrepreneurial Chef and creating this platform. And what they've been able to do is just, it's absolutely mind-boggling. It's a food blog for anybody that hasn't been to Pinch of Yum or heard of Pinch of Yum. They make $50,000 or $100,000 a month off of a food blog.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy to think. Lindsay started out as a teacher and then just kind of wanted to start doing a food blog and just kind of did this on the side. And then Bjork was working with a nonprofit and then just kind of dug into doing the business side of a food blog and maybe like marketing and stuff. And then they just haphazardly started putting this together and pieces started falling into place for a couple of years. And they did that on the side before they actually started doing this full time. So it's just phenomenal what they've been able to do.
Yeah, it's wild. And from there, they've also transitioned to Food Blogger Pro, which is a community for food bloggers, something that I've definitely done a lot of before. And I know a lot of listeners here as well. So even if you're not looking to have a recipe type site, I think this will be a valuable conversation for anyone that's looking to build their brand, to start something, to get some attention around what they're doing.
Yeah, that and especially getting content out there, visible, seen, traffic to your website for customers, for whatever you have.
Yep, I'm excited to hear the origin to where they are now and how it's all kind of come to be. So what do you say we hop in, Sean?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Hey there, Bjork. How's it going today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, honored to be on the podcast and excited to talk to you guys.
So to start things out, could you give the audience just a quick overview of your background and what you guys are up to?
Yeah, for sure. So whenever I talk about this story, I want to make sure that people know that we have this interesting partnership. So I talk about stuff a lot on podcasts and talk about the business side of things, but none of what I do would be, I'd be able to do it without Lindsay, who is not only my partner in business, but also more importantly, my partner in life. So Lindsay and I got married back in 2009. And in 2010 is when things really kicked off for us. And it was a slow and steady start. But in 2010, Lindsay was working as a teacher. I was working at a nonprofit. And Lindsay was just getting interested in starting to make meals. And she had always been interested in recipes and food and food content. So would look up, recipes and things like that. But for the first time, I was cooking for two people and really enjoyed that. And so she's posting recipes on social media and kind of different outlets. And she's like, actually, I wonder if there's a better way to do this than just inundate my friends and family with recipes that I'm making. And so we sat down and we're like, hey, what would it be like to create a blog? And that was a thing at that time, but it wasn't as much of a thing as it is now. So we researched it, we looked into it. I was really into online marketing and websites and was really interested in website design and website development. So I kind of got excited about it from kind of the techie nerd side of things. Lindsay was excited about it from the recipe side of things. And so we registered the domain Pinch of Yum. We started off on what was a Tumblr website. So for those of you that are familiar with what Tumblr is, it's kind of a social media / content management system. And Lindsay jumped in and she started taking photos and learning how to write about food and write about recipes and publish recipes and develop recipes and take photographs that looked good. And all the while I started to learn a little bit more about the online content side of things. And the behind the scenes. And this is the Spark Notes version, but Lindsay continued to work hard. I continued to learn. And a couple of years in, we got to the point where we said, hey, there's a decent amount of traffic. I wonder if this can become something. So at that point, we decided to kind of double down on the initial success that we had and start to experiment with creating an income from purely the content on the site. So from ads and selling products related to that, information products and digital products and things like that, and started to have some success with it. And that success that we had in the early days didn't look like anything super dramatic. It was $20 in a month or $40 in a month, but that slowly would build. And we had this belief, hey, if we can make $20, then we can make $40. And maybe it's like in a restaurant where if one person can show up some night, that means another night 2 people can show up, or 4 people, or 8 people. And we really believed in that philosophy and continued to grow it. And along the way, launched a couple other sites related to that. One is called Food Blogger Pro, which is training and education for people that want to do something similar to what we've done. And fast forward to today. So where we're at right now, we have a small team. We have 7 people that we work with. 4 of which are local. And then we also have 3 that are connected with Food Blogger Pro, and that's a remote team. And Lindsay and I continue to love what we do. It's a lot of work. And you guys know this too. There's never an easy day, but there's always something that you enjoy waiting just around the corner, and continue to find that to be true for what we're doing here today. So that's kind of the Spark Notes version of where we're at and what we're doing.
And now, Bjork, before we dive into a lot of that, I know that you all have produced income reports, and you've been very transparent about the blog and kind of how you all have been able to monetize, which definitely feeds into that Food Blogging Pro course, because you obviously are teaching people. So just so that the audience really understands the gravity of it, because to me it's massive gravity, share a little bit about where you're at now in terms of like the income level. And then again, we'll dive into some of this, the evolution of everything.
Sure. Yeah. So, and I think that's helpful. It's one of the things, we have a podcast for food bloggers called the Food Blogger Pro podcast. And it's always nice when people are transparent or public about some type of statistic, because then you feel comfortable asking about it, because it helps for the people that are listening to this podcast to know, like, okay, where do you land with it? So totally get that question. It makes sense. So for Pinch of Yum on any given month, it would gross between $50,000 to $100,000. Now, obviously, there's money that goes back into the business, and we're trying to be really intentional about doing that, putting money back into the business in order to continue to grow it. But even at those older income reports, you can look back and see that it's not uncommon for there to be a month where maybe there would be $70,000 of revenue towards the end, and maybe $20,000 to $30,000 of expenses. That's just like a really broad estimate. So that's that wouldn't be an uncommon month for Pinch of Yum. And that, again, that comes from a lot of time, a lot of energy. And we also have a team. I always want to remind people of that at this point. But in the early stages, we didn't. And it was just us building it. But that would be what we're looking at in terms of revenue as a business from Pinch of Yum.
Yeah, let me pick my jaw up off the floor. Go ahead, Chris.
So Bjork, yeah, I know Sean didn't quite have the same story as me starting out, but I started around the same time blogging as you guys. Those first couple of blog posts got 12 views, 18 views.
Absolutely, yeah.
What was the transition like of the early days to where you were able to monetize? What was that timeline like?
Yeah, it was slow and steady. So when we started the income reports, the first time that we did an income report was let me pull up the exact date. So it was September of 2011. And so that was like a year and a half, 2 years after starting the blog, which doesn't sound like that much when we're talking. It's like, oh, year and a half, 2 years. But I think if you actually sit down and create content every other day for 2 years, for a year and a half, or even for a year, it feels like such a long time. And to do that for such a long time and then to not see quote unquote results from it, I think can be a real drain. So that's one of the things I always want to remind people of is there is a long period where we were earning nothing and putting in a lot of work. And that continued on for a really long time. There's one report that I did where I crunched the numbers on how much time between Lindsay and I both working on the blog combined. It was the amount of time that we spent, and then it was the amount of money that we had earned. And then it was calculating like, what would the hourly wage be on that? And it was like, well, at that point we would have been better off working, serving tables. Like we would have earned more working in a restaurant as opposed to taking photos of food and publishing them, because those early stages, you're getting the ball rolling. You're not able to, at least with a content-based business, you're not able to quickly scale that because it takes so long to put the proverbial coal in the engine to get the train moving. So to give you hard, concrete numbers, so September 2011 was that post that we earned $20 from. Again, we had launched the site in April of 2010. And then the first time that we had created an income, again, Lindsay was a teacher and I was working at a nonprofit, so it wasn't like a super substantial amount. But the first time that we had a month where it would have been equal to what our jobs were individually was a month where it was August 2012. And that was the blog earned $4,000. And at that point, we were like, oh, this is what we would be earning with a quote unquote normal job. And that was, for us, we sat down and we're like, oh, this is a thing. This could be a thing. And that was, again, August of 2012. But we didn't leave our jobs for another year after that. And even in quote unquote leaving our jobs, it was this slow and steady transition. And I'm a big fan. One of the things that I like to say is build a bridge, don't burn a boat. And I think sometimes people think of the ventures that they go on as you got to burn the boats, right? So there's that analogy or that idea that you bring the ships in and you burn the boats because there's no going back. And I think that works for some people, but I think for other people, myself included, there's something to be said about building a bridge and knowing that you can go back and forth and that you have that option. And that was true for us. Both the jobs that we left, Lindsay with teaching and me at this nonprofit, felt like we had really good line of communication with them. It was a slow and steady transition. So we weren't super stressed about making that, exiting out of that and still had those connections. Would there be other timeline pieces that you'd be interested in knowing in terms of that transition?
For me, one quick question to kind of piggyback that is, when y'all started out, was the goal and intention of creating a business out of it, or was it just kind of a passion project for Lindsay?
Yeah, great question. I think I had always had the mindset of, hey, I wonder if we could turn this into something. I think Lindsay, like turning it into something looked different for Lindsay. I think she was interested in connecting with people, developing a voice as a writer, comments on a post and engaging with people, developing her craft. I think it was less business oriented than it was for me. I think for me, I'm really interested in all things finance. So whether that's personal finance, business finance. So that allowed me to really lean into that. And I could maybe see that because that's the world that I lived in. But I think when we started, it was more of an experiment and less of, we want this to be our ticket out of a job. It was more of, we love our jobs. We really liked what we did. And hey, here's this fun thing that we get to do on the side. And let's see if we can make something from it.
To kind of jump back, you had said something, and I can completely attest to it. You had said that creating content every other day, that a year or year and a half, it doesn't sound that long, but when you're doing something every other day and you're in that grind, it's just that the days are incredibly long. And that's the same thing that I've experienced being a parent now, is that the days are incredibly long, and now it's almost a year. It seems like it flew by. Now, Early on, what were some of the things that you were doing consistently, just over and over? Talk a little bit about what was that work that you were putting in to then have this grow and materialize one day.
For Lindsay, it was consistent posting. And I think, in those first 2 to 3 years, I don't know if there was a week that went by, maybe 1 or 2, where she didn't post 2 to 3 times a week. And that has to be fit into the early hours or evenings or over lunch. So that was really burning the candle at both ends and sacrificing either sleep or social activities or things like that. There's no golden ticket where here's one, little tip or trick that we had that we're able to do that allowed us to really grow and scale. It's all of the stuff that everybody knows that they need to do, but nobody likes to do it. The difference is that those sites that you do see that succeed, or businesses or restaurants or whatever it would be, have that unique ability to continue to do those things, combined with the fact, and I think this is really important, that they also have either a unique, raw, undeniable talent combined with the work ethic, or if they don't have that unique talent or raw skills, they're willing to develop those through continual improvement. And I think that speaks to both realities. There might be those people who put in a ton of time, put in the energy, do the work, but they're not very good. And even if you do all of those things and you're not good, then you're not going to find success, whatever that looks like. But if you are one of those people that's not good, whatever that means, whether it's building a restaurant or building a business online, you can get better. It just takes intentionality, and it takes work, and it takes time. And then there are those people who have the raw skills and talent and ability, but they're not willing to put in the effort that it takes and the time that it takes to get to the point where you can work 5 years, 7 years, 10 years and be an overnight success. And I think that happens even with the people that have that innate raw skill talent, is that if you look back at their storyline, they have 5, 7, 10 years before that where they've been hustling until the point where they break onto the scene, and then it looks like they're an overnight success. So when we look back and say, what were the things that were most important for us as we started to build this? It's still the exact same things that we're doing every day. It's getting up, it's producing content, it's making one small move on a really big project. It's hiring somebody for the first time and feeling that tension, but knowing that we need to move forward on it if we want to continue to grow. And the analogy that I give is I read this story about a guy who ran the London Marathon in a gorilla suit, except he didn't run it, he crawled it. So he was wearing a gorilla suit, I think, as kind of a PR thing to make a big deal out of it. And it was kind of unique. And he was doing it as a fundraiser. But then instead of running it in the gorilla suit, he took it one step further and he crawled it. And I remember reading that, and I remember thinking, this is exactly what we do. Every day we show up, not necessarily put on a gorilla suit, but that I'm still trying to work that into it. Maybe I'll figure out a way. But we show up and we crawl a little bit of the marathon, and we get done. And at the end of every day, I look back, I'm like, God, what did I do? How did I advance things? I know that I was working hard and I was moving things forward. But when you look back day to day, it doesn't seem like that much. But at the end of his time at this, 26.2, if that's what marathon is, I think it is, he looks back and he did a marathon. He crawled a marathon. And that's true for us as well, where every once in a while we have this point where we look back and we're like, oh, we've crawled a marathon, but it doesn't feel like it day to day. And so if I were to pinpoint one thing, it would be that daily consistent effort to make small improvements, continue to do the work that matters, and to develop that raw skill or talent if you have it.
So Bjork, was there a tipping point for you guys? For me, I wrote a certain article that went viral and I already had a little bit of traction, but instantaneously I had this bigger platform and it helped me to grow things a lot faster. What did that look like for you guys?
Yeah, for sure. I talk about it in terms of one-hit wonders. And I think if you look at any band, I used to, in college, I would play music, and I don't play as much anymore, but that was my thing in college. So I'd play coffee shops and colleges and things like that. And that's how I paid the bills in college. And what I learned was, as I looked at other artists that had had success, whether they be songwriters or musicians, I realized that they had written hundreds and hundreds of songs before they would have a hit. And it was almost like there's this formula, and the formula was, for every 200 songs, you get one really good one. And I think the same could be applied for content creation. So for every 100 posts you write, you get one really good one. And I think if you look at the behind the scenes for any website or content-based business, they're going to have these all-stars that drive, let's say, 60% to 70% of the traffic. And that will maybe be 10 to 20% of the content. So it's maybe kind of the 80-20 rule, where 20% of your content drives 80% of the traffic. I don't think it's always that easy to drill it down to those percentages. So that's part of it. You have to pay your dues in terms of the content creation in order to get one of those that catches on or goes viral. And the only way to do that is continually create that content. And maybe that's on social media, it takes off. Maybe it's on Facebook, maybe it's, who knows how that goes viral, quote unquote. So that there's part of that is true for us. The other thing that I believe to be really true along with this one hit wonder mentality is that when you're starting out, it's not how many that matters, it's who. And what I mean by that is, when you're in the beginning stages, you know that the content you're producing or the thing that you're doing doesn't have a lot of exposure. And you can see that. You talked about that, Chris. You said, you publish this and there's 14 people that see it. And that can be really demoralizing when you spend 6 hours creating something and publish it, and then it falls flat, and then it doesn't pick up. It's not like it falls flat and then, in 2 years, then it gets really popular. It might happen, but usually not. So the important thing to remember is it's who, not how many, especially in the early stages, because when you publish this, you never know who those 14 people are. And that might be your uncle, your mom, and your best friend, Bob. But it also might be Oprah or Anthony Bourdain or the editor for BuzzFeed that wants to feature your recipe. And if you focus on that, it allows you to justify the time and energy that it takes to do something that might not get a lot of exposure. And we found that to be true in the early stages where, and a really concrete example is we saw a real big spike for relative to what we had seen before. We were maybe getting 100 visits a day. And then one day it jumped up to like 1,500. Like, oh, what did this come from? And we digged into the statistics. So we use something called Google Analytics. And for those listening, if you don't have that set up, that'd be a really good tool to set up on your website, even if it's not a blog, so you can understand your traffic. So we looked at Google Analytics and we drilled down, and then we realized there was this really popular Pinterest user that had found one of the recipes and had pinned that to their board. We dug a little bit deeper and found out this person was one of the most popular Pinterest users because it was the mom of the founder of Pinterest. And I think what had happened is, like, in the early stages, he set her up as one of the recommended follows. And so she was using her son's news software that he had developed. And so she had millions of followers. And so because we had this mindset of who, not how many in those early stages, that allowed us to justify the time and energy that it took in those early stages to create good content. And that paid off when somebody who was extremely influential came in, saw that it was quality, and said, you know what, I want to share this with my audience. And from that, saw this initial boost. And there's been a lot of examples like that throughout the years where somebody comes across the content and it's not anything that we really intentionally did or a trick that we learned or a marketing tactic. We have those, and there are things that we have learned along the way that are tactical and important. But those boosts or those builds usually come from a result of interacting with or rubbing shoulders with other people who are able to help us get to the next level because of their influence, not just because of ours.
So Bjork, if someone was starting today and they wanted to create a food blog, but they were doing it because they wanted it to lead to something, whether it was going to be monetizing it with ads or something, but they were thinking about it more from a business standpoint, what would you recommend as the starting point?
Yeah, I think part of it depends on what that end goal is. And if they didn't know what that end goal should be, I would have some recommendations if they want to fast track what that looks like or if they want to fast track the transition from whatever they're doing now to doing that new thing full time. Ads, like purely working on an advertiser basis where it's display ads when you go to a site and you get, a fraction of a penny when somebody visits, it's going to take a really long time, and you have to have a lot of traffic in order to create an income from that. So if somebody's in that early stages, they don't have something, or maybe they have something and it's not working, my strong recommendation for them is to look at two things. The first would be, what do I feel like I'm an expert in, or expert enough? And what does expert enough mean? Expert enough means that if you look at the vast majority of people, you don't have to be the top 1% expert. You have to be better or more knowledgeable than the majority of people. And sometimes that can be a strategic advantage. If you aren't the ultimate expert, but you're somebody who's a little bit lower in terms of your expertise, you're going to be able to speak to those people in a more knowledgeable way. An example might be myself. I'm definitely not the ultimate expert on internet marketing or building websites or blogs. I'm expert enough that I'm able to come onto this podcast and speak to people in a way that hopefully they understand. But it's not so far off that it's like you imagine the world's best mathematician trying to explain math problems to me. I'd be like, I have no clue what you're talking about. Somebody who's like 60% as smart as him, I'd probably learn more from them. So the first thing is figuring out, what are you knowledgeable in? What are you expert enough in? That might be a certain cooking process. It might be a certain business model within the food industry. So you might know really well how to set up the ambiance of a restaurant. That is so critical for the restaurant experience, and people know that. And if you have a sixth sense or a previous experience in really understanding that, you're expert enough to be an authority in that. And people are trying to learn about that and understand that. So figure out what that is that you're passionate about, that you're interested in, and that you're expert enough in. And the second thing would be then figuring out how that fits into the needs that other people have. So for the restaurant ambiance example, if that's something that you're super passionate about, you're really interested in, and you have some authority on, you are somewhat of an expert on that, then go to the people that do have a restaurant and have those conversations with them and say, is this something that you're struggling with? If not, what are the things that you're struggling with? Start to understand the language that they use when they process through this issue that they have. And that will give you insight into what the actual problem is and how you can overlap those two things, your passion, interest, and expertise, along with their needs and their issues and the problem that they have. And where that intersection happens, that's where your niche is. And what is a niche? Well, it's something that allows you to be really specific. So restaurant ambiance, if that's your niche, it doesn't mean that that's what you have to do for the next 15 years. But I'd really recommend people start with a niche to become known as something, to become an authority on that. Later, you can niche up, but they call it land and expand. So you want to land on a niche. Later on, you can expand out into other things, but you really want to land on that niche and really own that. And that's where the content creation part comes in. So Pinch of Yum maybe isn't a great example because it's a general recipe and lifestyle blog. It's a huge ship that took a really long time to get moving. But if you have a smaller niche, and you're able to create content around that, it's going to be more of a speedboat. You're not going to be able to carry as much, but you're going to be able to get going a lot faster. So I guess that would be my encouragement to people that are listening. Find your expertise, what you're passionate about. Ask the people that you know that you might be able to solve their problem for them, what that's about, and then start to think about, how am I uniquely equipped to create content around that? Could be a podcast like you guys do. It could be writing blog posts. It could be doing case studies. You could do photographs before and after. And that's when it gets into the intentional marketing side of things and really leaning into that process.
Yeah, and just based upon what you said, I wanted to share this too, because it speaks to what you're essentially teaching, is that once you find a niche, you can stand out. You said that it took a while for you all because it was just kind of really wide with Entrepreneurial Chef. it was so focused, just food entrepreneurship, and there wasn't anybody that was really doing anything. So it was very quick. However, I always say this too when I share that with someone, is that it took me 10 years working in a culinary school to understand the demographic, the problems, the mentality, to make the contacts. But to your point, when you have that niche, that's when you can definitely stand out.
And I think that's a really important piece too, is don't look just future, look past and say, how does my past story impact my future decisions? And a good example of that is Lindsay, who was a 4th grade teacher and is so well equipped to teach people, decided that she wanted to do photography workshops, so teach people about food photography. And those have been a huge success because not only is Lindsay an expert in photography, and I think she would be a self-described expert enough. She wouldn't say I'm the top 1% in photographers, but she would say she's really good. She has a proven track record. Pictures are shared millions of times. And she has this experience as a teacher. That's her story before this story, but she's using that and thinking about how can I use that for my future decisions. And that allows her to be really successful with workshops because she knows how to teach. And the result of that is we have these workshops and they, sell out. The last one sold out in like 3 minutes. It happens so quick because there's only, 26 spots. So it's not like there's 1,000 people that are signing up for it. But her backstory allows her to have success with that. People post about it. They talk about it. They talk about what the experience was like. But that wouldn't be the case if she didn't have that expertise and experience as a teacher. So for those that are listening, don't just think about the things that you don't have. A lot of times people hear websites and blogs and technology and social media, and they think about their inadequacies in those areas. But think instead about what are the things that you are really capable of. Maybe it's your network. Maybe it's the job that you had before this and the thing that your boss taught you. Maybe it's the job you had before this and the things that you learned not to do. How can you fold those into the things that you're looking forward to doing and be better at them and lean into those strengths? So I think that's a great point.
And just to kind of also follow up with that, a lot of people reach out to me looking for, maybe they're trying to start a seafood restaurant, let's say. Yeah. And they always say, well, I need some funding. Well, the best way to be able to get funding is, well, if you have a rich uncle or parent, that's great.
Yeah, for sure.
But a lot of folks don't. So, okay, well, if you can start building a brand for yourself, if you have 100 recipes on Pinterest of different seafood dishes you've been doing in the restaurant, then automatically you're now a credible source of knowledge. So I think part of it is also, building the brand for yourself. And then also, I think it's important to realize as you're building this brand for yourself, website, blog, to not just look at it like you guys are, making, a killing through the website, but it can also lead to other opportunities, like you said, with Lindsay doing the photography workshop and things like that. So thinking outside the box as well, I think.
Yeah. Do you see, I don't want to speak too outside of my expertise here, and restaurants definitely aren't my expertise, but do you see people that are interested in starting a restaurant thinking with like a bootstrap mentality, where instead of how do I start a restaurant, are there people that are building like day one profitable businesses by doing things like hosting like an event at their house where they have 12 people over and they give them, a 3-course meal? Or are people doing things like that? Or is it usually people are jumping right to the restaurant thing and is that real the strong desire for it?
Well, I think doing things like you mentioned would be super helpful, but I think it takes a lot more work and thoughtfulness. So I think a lot of people try and go the easy way out and don't.
Yeah. That's one of the things I love thinking about and talking about is, so in the restaurant scenario, and they talk about this with startups, they talk about minimum viable products. So they talk about it as an MVP. And the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, said this, that if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, then you've launched too late. And I wonder what that would look like for a restaurant. So what would it look like to, instead of launching a restaurant and, crossing your fingers on the first day that the menu that you release is going to be good, to instead say, hey, I want to launch a restaurant in 2 years, 3 years. And instead, what I'm going to do is do these like micro restaurants or pop-up restaurants where I'm going to, much like a comedian goes to the club at 2 a.m. when nobody knows he's going to present in order to work on his jokes. I wonder if you could do a version of that as an aspiring restaurateur to build something that's profitable from day one, where you're not putting in whatever, I don't know, restaurants are expensive, aren't they? Millions of dollars. And saying, how can I create a minimum viable product, the most basic thing possible, to start to understand how I can make this as incredible as possible. Maybe get feedback, do little surveys after. What was your favorite dish? That's that kind of stuff. I love thinking about that. But I also have zero clue how that industry works. So I'm speaking outside of my realm of expertise.
Yeah, Bjork, you touched on the absolute essence of what Chris and I try and teach some people too, individually and even collectively on things, is how can you start with something today? How can you put together a pop-up restaurant experience? How can you start a food blog? How can you start writing twice a week to then articulate better and build your brand and get exposure? How can you do that and then eventually get to that restaurant in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years and possibly get funding from investors because now you have a brand? I think the problem is that in I think it's societal as well. We want the instant gratification, and in the 5-year plan, it's a little too hard to do.
Right. I think one of the other realities that is important for people to sit with and to process through is, do you like the idea of it more than you like the actuality of what is involved with it?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, we see that a lot with blogs and websites. I think people really like the idea of working for themselves and being at home, and the idea of making a recipe and taking photos of it and publishing that. But in terms of what that actually looks like and feels like, it's very different than what the idea of it is. And I would guess that the most successful people that run a restaurant are people that are obsessed and love some of the things that most people hate. Or that they are willing to really lean into those things. And we have a friend who is here in the Twin Cities, and he's an incredible entrepreneur and owns a couple of restaurants that are some of the most popular restaurants here in the Twin Cities. And he talked about this realization of when he was a few years in, realizing how much of owning a restaurant is paperwork. He's like, I feel like I'm doing paperwork all day long. And some of these realizations, I would assume, are things that you start to, that they don't teach in school necessarily. And I would assume it's some of the realities of what it actually looks like to run a restaurant. And again, speaking outside of my expertise, but I don't know, but it's part of the reasons why it's interesting. It's new content, right? But I would assume that a lot of the people that are really good at that love some of the things that are actually really hard. An example would be for, blogs and websites. I really love the process of sitting down at a computer by myself and sorting through tasks that we have to do and prioritizing those. I know a lot of people that hate that idea, that wouldn't like to be by themselves for 6 hours a day sitting at a computer. And I'm guessing there's equivalents in the restaurant world.
Oh, there absolutely is. And I think that's why we see so many restaurants fail. And at the same time, there's so many blogs and podcasts that you start out and you post a few times out of the gates, but then because it's fresh and exciting, but then once the newness wears off, it's not quite as fun and sexy and fresh. So how many food blogs are out there and how many still are active and updated? Same thing with podcasts. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. You see that. It's one of the things that that I love looking at is like, okay, when did this person start and when did they stop? And it's so common to be excited about it, to get into it and then realize, oh, this is really hard. And I think that this is really hard part is one of the most important parts, because that's what you need to become familiar with and comfortable with. Because if you are going to continually build and thrive, it's that time period that you're going to be really well familiar with, because you will find success, you will grow, you will build, but inevitably you have to go back to this point where you're rebuilding, you're relearning, you're doing the next thing, because if you stagnate, then you're going down, right? So maintaining is going down, so you're needing to refresh that every once in a while. It's one of my favorite little graphs. It's called The Life of a Project, and it's from a book called Steal Like an Artist. And awesome. Yeah, so you're familiar?
Yeah.
So if you can imagine like a V, I'll try and describe it for people that are listening, a V with dots on it. So kind of like a graph, and it's called The Life of a Project. And on the top left side, like the very top, it says, this idea is the best idea ever. And then it goes down into the right. Okay, this is harder than I thought. And then this is going to take some work. And then this sucks and it's boring. And then the very bottom they call it dark night of the soul. And that's usually when people quit. It's when stuff's not working. It's when it's not fun. It's when you have to not go out with your friends on Saturday night because you have to do this project or go into the restaurant or whatever it is. But then it turns around and it says, it'll be good to finish because I'll learn something. And then it's like, it's done and it sucks, but it's not as bad as I thought. And I think that continues on. It gets better, right? But there's some type of cycle that we go through where as entrepreneurs, we're always running into times where we have this dark night of the soul. And that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means that you've stuck with it long enough to experience that dark night of the soul. And you will move out of it if you're able to move through it.
We had Seth Godin on the podcast. It's kind of like his idea of the dip.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I think it's so important for people to understand that. Another parallel would be the idea of the resistance. And Stephen Pressfield wrote a book called The War of Art. And he talks about this thing that you feel when you're doing creative work. And he believes, I think in some sense, that it's like an actual spiritual being. But I think everybody in some way is acquainted with this idea of the resistance. Like for me, it's the thing that it's reminded to go do the dishes when I sit down to write a piece of content, or it's checking Mashable instead of sending an email to a scheduled podcast interview. Like the resistance keeps us from doing that important work. So I think it comes in many flavors.
Yeah, and The War of Art, for anybody listening that is a creative, phenomenal book. I mean, phenomenal book. And it's not The Art of War. I know some people have gotten that confused. It's truly The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. A phenomenal book. Yeah. Now, Bjork, can you shed some light to maybe open the minds of individuals that might be listening? What opportunities or what things could a food blog that starts taking off, what could it lead to? What are some of the various ways someone can start monetizing off of that?
Yeah. Well, I think that the hardest part is the part that you spoke to at the beginning. It's this idea of if things take off, if you have attention, then what can you do with it? And that's a really fun question to answer because there's so many potential avenues to point that down, right? So I'll give you a way out example, but it just influences the power of attention. So we were at the Minnesota State Fair. If you guys are ever in Minnesota, then you need to go to the State Fair because not only is it great people watching, but they also have some really bizarre, incredible food. And so we were hanging out with a couple friends, and Lindsay took a photo. It was two of my really good friends. And she took a photo and posted it to Instagram, and both of these guys are single. And she said, guys, these are some of the most incredible guys that I know. And, wink, wink, they're both single. And just yesterday, our friend texted us and he's like, or it was just a couple days ago, he's like, hey, just went on a date that I met from somebody through that post that you put out on Instagram. That's awesome. But point being, once you have people that are paying attention, you have the ability to direct those people to certain places. And if you have attention, chances are that you also have trust that's established with these people. And in that interaction with our friends, these people trusted Lindsay. They're familiar with her and they knew, hey, this is somebody that's probably a good person because we trust that Lindsay's a good person and we trust what she recommends. So what does that look like? Well, it could be something that you create. So if you are interested in creating your own restaurant or building some type of retail in-person experience, if you have that attention, you're going to be able to direct that to those places. And you could say something like, hey, grand opening. For anybody that reads this blog, you can XYZ. Maybe there's some type of incentive. We're going to have only a Pinch of Yum night. So show up at 6:00 and it's only going to be Pinch of Yum readers. And you think about the massive celebrities that do that, the Kanye Wests of the world, and then they have a Yeezy pop-up store, and there's blocks and blocks and blocks of people that show up. That's a super extreme example. But you could also do it on a smaller scale where maybe you don't have your thing, but you have somebody else's thing. That would be called sponsored content, or another version of that is called affiliate marketing. Sponsored content would be somebody comes to you and they say, hey, we know that you have a really strong following of people that own restaurants and they want to figure out how to make the ambiance in their restaurant better. And we are a new startup that does colored Wi-Fi connected light bulbs. We will pay you X amount, let's say $5,000, if you use this product, if you like it, and you talk about it to your audience. So that would be sponsored content. An example for Pinch of Yum, we work with companies like Land O'Lakes. So the most recent post, or a recent post on Pinch of Yum, is pumpkin gnocchi with sage butter sauce. And we partnered with Land O'Lakes, and they know that people are looking and consuming that content. So they're exchanging dollars for attention, and they pay us to do that. Affiliate marketing is another example of that. So for those that aren't familiar, instead of getting paid up front, you say maybe use a product. A really easy example is maybe one from Amazon. And let's say you use a certain whisk and you love it. It's the best whisk ever. You write about it, and you can take a link from Amazon, as they call it, an Amazon associate. So you're associating yourself with Amazon. You can post a link on your blog or social media and say, I loved this whisk. I really recommend for anybody that makes food on a consistent basis or is really into cooking that you get this. Here's the link. If you buy it through me, then I get a percentage of it. And usually it's like 4 to 6%. So let's say you sell $1,000 of those whisks, then you get $50. So that's another example of ways that you can create an income. And then we could go on, but display advertising is a really important one for a Pinch of Yum. Again, if you're going to do display advertising, you're going to have a decent amount of engagement on your website. So a good number to use, super, super simple, is let's say you have 1,000 page views, meaning that every day there's 1,000 page views on your site, people that have viewed 1,000 pages. It could be one person viewing 1,000 or 1,000 people viewing one. If you have that, you would get the equivalent of $10 with most ad networks. There's a lot of things that go into that variables. But you're able to take that and say, okay, I know that if I have that, that means that I could maybe earn $300 in a month from my blog or my website if I have 1,000 page views every single day. So those are just some basic ideas for ways that you could create an income from, again, social media. It doesn't have to be just a blog. It could be social media as well. You see a lot of sponsored content on Instagram because there's a lot of engagement on that platform right now. But that would be the ways that I would recommend from at a high level how people could get started.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, when I send the link over on Facebook or Instagram, wherever, to my book, I use my Amazon associate link.
Yeah.
It's legal. I'm not sure, but
super smart. Yeah, no, the idea being that not only are you selling your book, but you're also getting a commission because you're sending that traffic to Amazon.
Exactly. So Bjork, back when you guys started, back when I started, the landscape was a little bit different. Now it's a lot, I'd say, easier. The tools are probably easier, but it's a lot more crowded. What would you give as suggestions? Obviously, you guys have Food Blogger Pro, and we'd love to talk a little bit about that too. But what do you give some suggestions about people starting out, looking to build a brand, building a blog for themselves?
Yeah, I love the idea. Kevin Kelly is a futurist and an author that talks about a lot of different things, but technology specifically. And he talks about this, Seth Godin talks about this through his reading of Kevin Kelly, but talks about 1,000 True Fans. And I think for those that are just getting started, it's really important to not think about how can I get 1 million people following me, but how can I get 1,000 true fans, and what would those people look like, and what would be the thing that what would be the way that I can serve those people in a really specific way. And maybe it's, you're creating consulting or coaching product or something like that. But think small initially in order to get started. And I would also say, to speak really ground level, we're on the dirt here, not in the clouds. I would say, think of a way, if you're wanting to make that transition sooner rather than later, think of a way where you could trade your time for dollars. And that's going to be one of the quickest ways to get started. And nobody wants to do that right off the bat, but it's going to be the thing that's going to move the needle quickest, because there are a lot of people that have experienced a certain amount of success that don't have that time, and they would be willing and interested to bring somebody in to help leverage the thing that they have built, and will trade dollars for time and expertise. So that would be the first thing if you're just getting started. I would also say, really start to understand where you are most capable in terms of your voice. And your voice doesn't mean literally your voice like we're talking right now, but where do you feel like you express yourself best? Is it in a podcast where you're talking like this? Is it in writing where you can sit down and really refine your thoughts? Is it through video? Can you really connect with people on a level that other people can't by creating video? And then lean into that, whatever it might be, writing, video, audio, and create content for the thing that you are interested in, and have that coaching or consulting offering. Not that you can't have something down the line, but I would say that would be the quickest path to that. And that will also inform where you're doing that content marketing. It could be Instagram, it could be Facebook, it could be YouTube. There's not a hard and fast rule for the best way to do it. So much of it depends on who you are and what's going to allow you to commit to doing it for a long period of time. Does that answer your question, or is there ways that I could get more specific?
No, I think that's great. I would maybe just add to that, in being, connecting with already established influencers in your space. Have them maybe guest blog or share a recipe, that kind of thing too. Yeah,
and I would say with that, because we get that question a lot, like, hey, how do I connect with people? I'm looking to XYZ. I'm looking to come on your podcast would be an example. And I think people have to have the mindset of, before ever asking, to give abundantly. And I think that feels, I think we understand that in ways where we interact normally with people, but we don't understand that whenever it switches into business or when there's a screen in front of us. And I think about when we moved into the neighborhood, how bizarre would it have been if we went over to our neighbors and asked if they could make us cookies? Like, it's just a terrible way to establish a relationship. Yet so often the initial interaction that we have with people online is asking them to do something. I get multiple emails a day from people asking if they could, come on the podcast or do a guest post or something like that. And I can't think of any example of, and there probably are these, but I can't think of them, of people coming and saying, hey, I would love to promote what you're doing. I love what it is. How can I do that? And then doing that on a consistent basis before ever making an ask. And I think if you're able to do that in a really genuine way, your ability to truly connect with influential people is going to be really great. And the other thing related to that is, if you are really struggling to get into those circles, whatever they might be, but I think about that all the time. I'm sure there's circles of restaurant owners, and it's like there's the haves and the have-nots, and all the cool people hang out together. And I think of, we were in, I was doing a trip with a friend, and we were at this, Husk, the restaurant Husk, and I'm trying to think, what is the guy's name?
Tom Brock.
Yeah, so we were in Charleston, and and there's this rumor that Sean Brock would hang out at this bar called, I think it was called Griffin, and it has like all these dollar bills around it. So we tried to have this like run in with Sean Brock where we went to this bar late at night to see if he came over after, and of course he didn't. But there's this idea of like, hey, what are those circles that people run in, and how do you break into those? And but if you feel like you're struggling getting connected with those people, I would encourage you to create those, to be the center point for them. So instead of trying to get into somebody else's, to create that. Maybe it's officially through meetup.com, but it wouldn't have to be. Maybe you can reach out to people who you respect that aren't totally in another realm in terms of what they're doing, but are maybe kind of on par or a little bit ahead of where you are, and saying, I'm gathering some of these really influential people once a month, and we're having conversations around how to build our business. Would you want to be a part of it? I'll cover coffee and donuts or whatever it would be. So that would be my other encouragement if you're looking to network and connect with people.
Well, two things. Number one, I just realized why my neighbors don't like me.
Yeah,
because I go ask them to make me cookies.
That's your takeaway for this podcast. I'm glad that you got something out of it.
Thank you, Bjork. But what was that, Chris?
Chocolate chip.
Yes.
Not only did you ask, but you asked for a specific kind.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Gluten-free, no dairy, need the dairy-free chocolate chips. Yeah.
Preferably at 100 degrees delivered tonight.
That's exactly right.
Chili.
Yeah.
So to round out, can you share a little bit about Food Blogger Pro? And I think this is an actual real example of how you all had the food blog and it led to another opportunity that kind of solidified your brand of business.
Yeah, absolutely. So Food Blogger Pro, and it's maybe also a good example of just an extreme niche, right? So it's not just talking about blogging, which is a niche, but it's talking about food blogging. So when we got started, people were like, really? Like that's a thing? You can build a business around that? And it's not going to be $1 billion business, right? But it's a successful small business. But that really came out of not us creating something and then pushing it on people, but it's kind of like that the conversation that we had before where we said, hey, have those interactions and conversations with people to start to better understand what they need. When we had those 3 or 4 years ago, we realized that people were really interested in having a platform where they talk about food or recipes or there are certain, diets. We have a lot of people that have dietary restrictions. They wanted a place to help other people that also have those same restrictions. But we're really struggling to figure out how to do that. What's the best way to show up higher in Google? How do you take better photographs? Now we're talking a lot about video. How do you create videos that are effective and engaging? And we heard people coming to us often because we were doing those things. We were talking about them publicly on the blog. And from that, we said, hey, there's probably a niche for this, a way that we can create something that will solve the problem that a lot of people have that are reaching out to us. So that was in 2013. We created Food Blogger Pro, and it's been the same story as Pinch of Yum, slow, steady, consistent growth where we've had this community for a long time. We feel like we have been really intentional to build around this community, but it hasn't been the kind of thing where you create it on day one and it's an overnight success. But little by little over time, we've built it into a community that we're honored to be a part of. So at this point, we have 2,600 members from around the world, everywhere from Japan to Australia to East, West Coast, Canada, Midwest, shout out, all of those places, people are coming and learning how to create high quality content and to build a brand online. We're kind of like a college or a university where we go through enrollment periods. We do those once every 3 to 4 months. So if you're interested in joining, the best way is to go to foodbloggerpro.com and sign up for the waiting list there. And once you do that, what we'll do is we'll send you some hey, while you wait, examples like you can listen to our podcast or here's some posts that we've written. But the actual enrollment for that isn't always open. We like to do it kind of on a staggered basis, kind of like a college. So everybody's coming in with it as a new quote unquote class. But yeah, that's Food Blogger Pro.
That's fantastic. And just one kind of final question as we wrap things up. Talk a bit about the role the community plays with each other in the course.
Yeah, it's huge. That's one of the things that, with any site like that, people say they come for the content and stay for the community. And the community element is so important because what that allows people to do is not only to more quickly learn what to do and what not to do, but it also allows people to share in the realities of what it looks like day to day to do this. And as you guys know, in your own respective industries, and within this industry as well, because you're doing it with, your site and your community and the podcast, there are things that are really hard about it. And the vast majority of people that you run into on the street, whether it be family or friends, aren't going to fully understand those struggles. And so it's nice to have a place where you can go, where not only are people able to help you, but they're also able to relate and say, hey, I was there 12 months ago. I was there 18 months ago. I know how hard that is. Stick with it. It'll get easier. Or here's one thing I did that made it a little bit easier. Try using this tool. Here's a mindset that helped me. So it's not only the left brain tactical stuff, it's also the right brain emotional, stick with it, you can do it kind of stuff. And both of those things pack a really strong 1-2 punch.
Awesome.
Bjork, your story is incredible. Your accomplishments are absolutely incredible as well. For the audience that's listening, how can they connect with you all? If you want to maybe one more time tell them about where to go for Food Blogger Pro or social media.
Yeah, you bet. So Pinch of Yum, you can just Google that and it's a Pinch of Yum on all the social handles. Food Blogger Pro would be the same thing. You can Google Food Blogger Pro. I'm a self-proclaimed social media. I don't even know what it would be, but I'm not super active on social media from a personal standpoint. We have our businesses that do it. And for me, it's like, I just get, especially on sites like Facebook or Instagram, I noticed that like after I use them for an extended period of time, like I generally feel worse about myself rather than better. And so I'm like, I don't know if I can do this consistently. So people can just drop me an email, bjork@foodbloggerpro.com if they want to connect and chat. And I check that consistently. Or you could drop me a line on social media and I would see it within 2 to 3 weeks.
All right. Well, Bjork, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it. Super fun to chat.
So that was our conversation with Bjork Ostrom. Sean, what were your takeaways, man?
I think the first one for me was the building a bridge concept. Personally, I have preached the burn the boat philosophy, and I think situationally it works for me and my personality, but his build a bridge concept, it really makes sense. And I think that in some ways is a very smart play. And then for some personalities like myself, I've tried to build a bridge before, and sometimes I just need to put myself in a situation where it's like do or die. So I think it's really situational, but I love the concept. The other thing was landing and expanding. So anybody that's pursuing an entrepreneurial venture, when you're thinking about kind of finding your niche, if you will, I know that I struggled with that before with the platform, and I think a lot of other people struggle with that when they're trying to figure out their business and their positioning and their niche, that sometimes it's a little too wide, but you can always expand. So if you find a niche now, you can always expand. So I love that land and expand kind of thought. What about you?
Yeah, well, and I totally agree with that. I think one of the things that he mentioned was that when they explained that they were going to start this Food Blogger Pro that would, focus on helping food bloggers grow and build their content, their friends were like, well, isn't that kind of a small niche? And now they have thousands and thousands of people that are a part of this community that are funding their business. So I think it's like you just mentioned, it's important to find that niche first. And if you can find what he also mentioned with 1,000 true fans, those people that really love the work that you're doing that can connect with it, then you can create a business with it. So I think it's a good lesson to hear and to learn. I liked, he was mentioning giving before asking. I think in today's day and age, a lot of us are trying to build our platforms on social media, on our blogs, and we're asking. But most of us don't sit back and really see, well, who are the people that I want to connect with that can maybe help me, and how can I help them first? And if you do that helping other people enough first, then I think the other part takes care of itself. And to go along with that, just the idea of community and how what they do is helpful, and they have a lot of people that are involved, but it really gets its greatest power through the idea of community and all these people that are able to bounce ideas off of each other, in their in the platform, but also maybe on Facebook. So I think it's important to see and understand that community can play a huge role in one's success. I know it has for myself. So let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment. Bjork left his contact information, so I'm sure he would love to hear as well, and you can connect with them. It's a really awesome thing that they're doing that's super helpful, and I strongly encourage you to check it out. So, Sean, what do you say you wrap it up with a quote this time, buddy?
Yeah, so we'll do from Bjork from the podcast. You don't have to burn a boat. You can build a bridge instead to go back and forth. And with that, signing off.